When I was a small child, about 10 miles from the home where I lived, a tornado came through and touched down, at least briefly. I don't know, they joke about tornadoes they joke about trailer parks being able to attract tornadoes, and indeed this small tornado that landed near my home managed somehow to tear apart a small trailer park along the side of a hill. I still remember seeing that for the first time, not the tornado, but the destruction. Cars were tossed about, trees knocked down, everything that formerly had a place was suddenly dislodged. It was chaos. Silverware, furniture, personal belongings, pieces of buildings just all strewn about. The forces of nature dislodged and disrupted everything at its very core. Now, I share that memory of that tornado back in Pennsylvania because I think for me it remains an important image that captures kind of what's real today. There are forces going on in our culture, in our world, that have managed to dislodge every reasonable expectation that we might normally carry. We probably all carried an expectation that somehow, after the kids got confirmed, they would come back when they were older. We probably had some sort of an expectation that we had reasonable job security. We never counted on COVID-19 and a complete shutdown of our economy and the loss of jobs, the loss of livelihoods, the disease that has ravaged our nation and indeed our world. And then we fold in on top of all that chaos and all of that disruption the whole new wrinkle of the Black Lives Matter movement. That has even dislodged the virus from the news cycle. And what once looked like a stable moment in our life, something that we could maybe manage or predict, suddenly is so disruptive that everything seemingly has been knocked off the table. And we have to pick up every piece of our life and look at it and examine it and decide, is it important enough to keep or to revive? And if it is, how does that piece fit together with all the other pieces that have been disrupted? We live in a very messy time. Not certain anymore who to trust, how to act, where to go, who's safe to be with, who we should fear. We live in a time not unlike the one that Jesus describes in this gospel story that I read this morning. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless. They were like sheep without a shepherd. That pretty much captures us. In the world in which we live in this moment in time, we are helpless and harassed. We feel like we have no shepherd. We're longing for direction and we don't know where to go. But we find good news in the words that Jesus shares in this gospel story, because Jesus is the one who looks out across this landscape. But he is here not only to observe. Jesus, if he wanted to simply observe things, could have stayed in heaven and simply looked down on the mess that we had going on here on earth and make note of what he observed. But that was not the heart of God. For God sent his only Son, Jesus Christ, into this world, sent him into the messiness of this world, into the political turmoil, into the helpless and harassing environment, into a moment in time where God's people were like sheep without a shepherd. And Jesus' response upon entering into our reality is twofold. The first thing that he did was he had compassion. He saw the pain and the helplessness. He saw how everything in our life that might have given us meaning was suddenly dislodged and disrupted. And Jesus was filled with compassion. And the second thing that he did was he called for laborers to work the harvest. He turned to his disciples, those people who would claim themselves to be followers of Jesus, and he encouraged them. You pray. You pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will raise up laborers who will work in the harvest. And you just might be God's answer to your own prayer. You are the only you that God has. And though we've tried from the earliest of times to pass the buck and to duck from underneath that kind of responsibility, God won't let it happen. Oh, we saw it from the very beginning, way back when, in the start of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. I mean, we got Adam and Eve here trying to pass the buck. Adam's blaming Eve for the mess that they find themselves in. Eve's blaming the snake. Everybody's blaming somebody else. Where does the buck stop? And Jesus would encourage us in this gospel story today. Jesus would imply that the buck stops with us. Pray to the Lord of the harvest that he will send laborers into that harvest. You, Peter and Andrew, James and John, Philip and Bartholomew, and the list and the roster goes on and on. You will represent the scope and the ferocity of God's compassion. You will be the one in the times when we feel helpless and harassed, when we feel as if we have no direction in our life. You will be the one who will represent God's compassion. Because still, the harvest is great. Still, the call goes out for us to respond and to labor in God's fields. God has you in mind when he calls for workers in the harvest. We can't pass the buck. We are the chosen of God. Chosen by God not for privilege or for position over others. Oh, the whole Black Lives Matter thing is causing all of us to think about what privilege means. and what it means to have power or authority over or with or for others. We have not been chosen by God for privilege or for position over others, but we have been chosen for others. We have been sent to labor for the harvest of the harassed and the helpless. Interesting in this story, the laborers serve the harvest, not the harvest serving the laborers. God changes people. God asks us to pray for the helpless and the harassed, for the sheep who seemingly have no shepherd. God asks us to pray for the harvest, and God's response to that prayer may indeed be you. Changed of heart, following Jesus, not with a sense of privilege, but with a sense of service and compassion in our heart. God's compassion, God's generosity changes people. And changed people change churches, and changed churches will change this world. Amen.